people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy.
The undisputed super featherweight champion of the world, Alicia the Baumgartner.
That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. An update to a story we've talked about several times already here on the channel here at year's end. We still don't know what the sanctioning bodies will decide to do in the case of Alicia Baumgartner, the still reigning undisputed featherweight champion, at least for the time being. No news has broken of any of the four major outfits stripping her of any of their alphabet titles. But because this entire case stems all the way back there to the summer months, what was it, July, August?
Should have come to a close by now.
The delay in adjudication, as it were, has allowed Alicia Baumgartner enough time to do some research, do an investigation of her own independent research that I'm going to assume she paid for out of her own pocket, and based on her samples, what are intended to be hair samples, they exonerate her, at least in her own opinion. The rationale being that if she were using Mesterolone for a competitive edge, it would have showed up in her hair samples, but it didn't. You know, that specific Mesterolone she tested positive for months ago, but a lot of people aren't buying it, and a lot of people are waiting to see what the sanctioning bodies do. I get the sense
They're waiting too.
they're waiting to see what the MUCC is going to do. The local commission that sanctioned the fight, the rematch between her and Christina Lenardatu, the MUCC haven't done anything. Anything for Alicia, anything against Alicia. And because they haven't reached any adjudication yet, perhaps that's what the sanctioning bodies are waiting for, on the predication that whatever decision the MUCC reaches, their own decision will be a reflection of that, and they will, in effect, be legally protected.
In a manner of speaking.
Maybe that's what the holdup is? That at least one or some of the alphabet organizations are waiting to see what the MUCC is going to do.
Not the WBO.
Not exactly. Well over a month ago, at the end of October, the very beginning of November, the WBO issued Alicia Baumgartner a show cause letter to show cause why she should remain WBO champion. I don't know what correspondence they've had behind the scenes, but what I do know is that was well over a month ago. If the WBO were going to strip her, I feel like they would have done that by now, because it's been well over 30 days. They issue those show cause letters. They don't give the recipient a whole lot of time to show cause, and because they first issued that letter at the end of October, the beginning of November, and here we are at the end of December, and there's no news of the WBO stripping Alicia.
Does she still have to show cause, or did she show cause already?
For me, it all further accents my blasé attitude towards doping in the sport of boxing. Alicia's doping case, or Connor's doping case, going all the way back to Tyson Fury's, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Just adds to my blasé attitude towards doping in the sport of boxing, or potential doping in the sport of boxing, if the sanctioning bodies themselves, the powers that be, don't feel it necessary to act in a timely fashion, because all of this started when it was still warm outside in the summer months. Here we are at year's end, and they still haven't done anything. If they don't feel all that pressed about it, then why should I?
I'm not about to Sally Struthers all over the place every time a fighter tests positive for a banned substance. It's becoming more and more frequent.
My entire attitude towards doping in the sport of boxing, whenever a fighter tests positive for a banned substance, it just accents that there may be more fighters doping than we realize. Male fighters, maybe female fighters. Who actually knows that behind the curtain, what's going on is very different to what we are being told.
I don't pretend to know.
Though to me, it seems hardly anything to lose sleep over when just this past weekend, we saw a guy who tested positive not once, but twice. For what was it? Six different banned substances on 2 separate occasions, and he was still able to come back to the sport and fight on a very big show, which further accents my blasé attitude towards doping in the sport. And then you see the duration of time that has already passed in reference to Alicia's situation, and how the sanctioning bodies, they haven't done anything yet. They don't seem pressed or stressed.
It doesn't seem like an urgent matter.
Just the other day, when Alicia was going back and forth with Clarissa Shields on social media, their verbal spat. You almost forgot that Alicia's got this doping situation that she's waiting on to see it through and see what happens. You almost forgot that all of that happened. The fans did.
Do they still care?
In men's super flyweight news, encouraging news as it pertains to a potential Bam Rodriguez versus Gallo Estrada fight. Estrada welcomes the Bam fight, saying next year it's going to happen. We don't know the date, but I'm sure it's going to happen. I'll give Jesse the opportunity. I'm scheduled to fight in February or March, at the latest, in Mexico. After that, 3 or 4 months, I could get in the ring again, and it could be with Jesse. And that's what you want to hear, that's what you want to see, because I do want to see Bam Rodriguez face a version of Juan Francisco Estrada that has had at least a tune-up fight, because Gallo hasn't fought since the Chocolatito trilogy, and that was over a year ago in 2022. Wouldn't make sense to go straight into a fight with a young guy, a young champion like Bam Rodriguez, without a tune-up fight. I want to see the best available version of Gallo Estrada versus the best available version of Bam Rodriguez, who has fast become the legend killer at these weights, having already taken out 2 of the 4 kings at super flyweight, Carlos Cuadras, Sorun Visai.
He won't fight Choco because they're good friends, but he's alright with fighting Gallo Estrada, and I'm alright with that.
I favor Bam Rodriguez to win, even though Gallo Estrada is a lot, and I mean a lot more experienced than Bam is as a professional. He's a very accomplished fighter. I don't take that away from him. And I don't think his power, the power in his punch, I don't think that's gone anywhere. His power is the last thing to go. But speed and reflexes, that's where I think Bam's got him beat. Bam does have power of his own.
But it's Bam's speed and movement that I think will get him.
Now, will Gallo Estrada prove to be Bam's toughest assignment? He is in many ways a more layered fighter than Carlos Cuadras. Carlos, he's been around for years.
He has.
Tough guy, very tough guy. But he's little more than just a volume puncher. Sor, he's a volume puncher, a pressure guy as well, but he's got a lot of power, whereas Gallo, there are more layers to Gallo's game than those guys, but he is getting along in the tooth. Gallo's an orthodox fighter, whereas Bam is a southpaw. Bam very recently was reintegrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list for his recent win over then unbeaten Sonny Edwards IBF champion. What a performance that was for Bam. An even bigger win would be a win over Gallo Estrada, and that would be a win over a reigning super flyweight champion, as Bam means to return there. Bam plays his cards right. He can have the run of the place. If he plays his cards right, that could be the start of an undisputed title run in a super flyweight division. Now, when's the last time the super flyweight division had an undisputed champion? That could be monumental for Bam, though more immediately,
beating Gallo could be enough for him to overtake Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney. That could be a big enough win that he would surpass them.
Bam's a very young guy, younger than those guys are by 1 or 2 years, I think, and he's already very accomplished. He's a 2-division champion, like Devin's a 2-division champion, but the scalp of one of the better fighters this division has seen in recent memory, the scalp of Gallo Estrada, that might be enough to allow him to overtake the number 7 spot, though, because he plans on moving up and he plans on vacating both the WBO and IBF titles. If and when he does, he will be ejected from the list until such a time as he can again procure an alphabet title, because the list is only for winners and only for champions. Emphasis on champions. Reigning champions, active champions, defending champions. Not guys who used to be champions, who used to hold a belt. Guys who have a belt they're currently defending.
Per the rules that govern the list, no fighter absent of a world title is allowed to maintain a rank, because the list is only for champions.
Could see Gallo Estrada return in the first quarter of next year, and the fight with Bam could materialize towards the tail end of the second or in the third.
He's looking forward to that.
In men's cruiserweight news, Just a refresher. This past weekend on the Day of Reckoning card, on the undercard, we saw former IBF champion Jai Opetaia dispatch Zurdo in just one round, and after the fight, after a post-fight interview, I saw him say that he's targeting the winner of the upcoming Richard Riakporhe versus Chris Billam-Smith rematch, what is, for Chris Billam-Smith's WBO title. Jai Opetaia wants in on that action, though I don't think he'll get the winner of that fight. I don't think he'll get them. I think what Ben Shalom will elect to do is put the winner of that fight, whoever it is, in the ring with former WBO champion Lawrence Okolie. Lawrence is still on that side of the street. He doesn't appear to be moving up in weight. It appears he's going to stay at cruiserweight, stay long enough to perhaps fight the winner of that fight. That's what I think Ben Shalom will elect to do. We all know about Ben's aversion to having to work with Eddie Hearn and work with Matchroom. He clearly doesn't want to do that. He wants to keep things domestic. He wants to keep things in-house, and I think he's going to, for what it's worth. The rematch between Richard Riakporhe and Chris Billam-Smith, I think Richard stands a good chance of winning that fight because he beat
Chris before. He beat Chris once. I think he can beat him again.
Except I think he can knock him out this time. Chris Billam-Smith is a fun fighter to watch. I take him for what he is, but he gets hit too much. You saw that in the Masternak fight. Now, Matthias Masternak, a very experienced guy with a lot of knockouts, guy's getting long in the tooth. He was catching him with a lot of shots, and I feel that a fresher, younger, unbeaten fighter in Richard Riakporhe, if he connects, if he lands a solid shot, he might take Chris Billam-Smith out. He is a more experienced fighter now than when they first met, and I understand that you could say the same thing about Chris Billam-Smith, but Richard comes into this rematch with the edge, with the chip on his shoulder, that he's not in unfamiliar territory. He fought this guy before, he beat this guy before, and he could beat him again, effectively becoming WBO champion, then potentially facing Lawrence Okolie, who doesn't have a very fan-friendly style, but
that's the least they can do for him. They convinced him to hold off on his right to an immediate rematch with Chris Billam-Smith.
The least they can do is get him the winner of Smith versus Riakporhe 2, and I think that's what they're going to do. Thus, Jai Opetaia, he's not a part of that scene. He's not a part of that picture. What Ben Shalom will elect to do is do a round robin of his own fighters, for his own fighters with the WBO title as the incentive. Thus, Jai Opetaia, he's not going to get any of those three guys in the ring. Not no time soon. Nope, not as long as they're with Ben. He's better off pursuing either Noel Gavor, the newly crowned WBC champion at cruiserweight, or Arsene Goulamarian if he is not otherwise preoccupied. It seems that the Saudis have taken a liking to Jai Opetaia, and who could blame them? His highlight reel knockouts of Jordan Thompson and Ellis Zurdo.
But the same reason that the Saudis like this guy so much is the same reason that Ben won't allow any of his fighters to touch this guy.
Not least of all that he doesn't have a title, he doesn't have a belt, he's not their problem. As a result of the IBF's very peculiar stance on Jai Opetaia's next fight, they were insistent that he has to fight Mairis Breidis next, even though he was going to, and Mairis Breidis himself, he was out of commission. He wanted the extra time off. He wasn't pushing for his title shot, his rematch yet, but they still decided to strip Jai.
Even though they had an agreement.
Jai takes care of business one more time before this year is out against Ellis Zurdo, and he goes into the Mairis Breidis rematch early next year. They had an agreement, and Mairis Breidis was on board, but the IBF took it upon themselves to strip him, which I found very suspicious, and it would seem, now we know why. Per Fox Australia's Ben Damon, the IBF will now order Mairis Breidis versus Gilberto Ramirez for their newly vacated cruiserweight title, and the search begins for an opponent for Jai Opetaia for February 17th in Saudi. Cruiserweight champions are Chris Billam-Smith, who we just talked about, Arsene Goulamarian, who's got the WBA, and Noel Gavor, otherwise known as Noel Mikhailian, who's got the WBC. And as far as I know, he's not otherwise preoccupied with anything, so Jai might be able to get that guy in the ring on the Saudis' dime. They can make it worth his while. They can make it worth the time. That's how it goes for Jai. But as far as that entire situation, that fiasco with the IBF, it seems we got the answers that we were looking for. At least I did, because I was waiting to see who's the IBF gonna order to fight for the newly vacated IBF title, because whoever it is and whoever represents them, they may be the ones that are paying the IBF to do what they did.
Take the title from Jai so they can give it to somebody else.
To cut him out of the picture so that Zurdo Ramirez can stand a better chance of becoming a champion at this weight. When I look at this situation, when I look at it, it seems to me that Golden Boy might have been paying the IBF under the table to take that title from Jai so Zurdo stands a better chance of winning it, because if he had to go through him to get it, he wouldn't get it. What he would get is a bill, a hospital bill.
All-night stay at the local hospital, courtesy of Jai Opetaia's fists.
You have to wonder how Zurdo Ramirez will fare against today's inactive and older version of Breidis, who is a full-fledged cruiserweight and a lot more experienced at this weight than Zurdo Ramirez is. I understand that Breidis is older and getting long in the tooth, and he hasn't fought in a long time, but you know, when Zurdo fought Joe Smith Jr., he hadn't fought in a while. He hadn't fought in a long time, and he was rocking Zurdo Ramirez with some of those shots, some of those punches, and Joe's not a cruiserweight, Joe's a light heavyweight who moved up in weight. Breidis,
That's a cruiser.
that Breidis may have been inactive in the last 12 months or so, but so was Joe. And Joe was still able to give Zurdo a fight. So what will Breidis give Zurdo if and when the time comes?
I don't think that's a walk in the park for Zurdo.
Who I've never been all that impressed with, and his power doesn't look nothing special, nothing to write home about at cruiserweight. He's always had a very big frame for super middle, even for light heavy, and at cruiser, he's got some height, he's got some size, he's got the frame for it, but he doesn't have that same explosive power you see in cruiserweights, that concussive power, and he seems to be boxing more.
Brawling less.
The lower weights at super middle, at light heavy. Zurdo Ramirez was best described as a mid-range to inside pressure fighter, volume puncher, whereas in that Joe Smith Jr. fight, when last we saw him, what won him the fight was the movement, was the boxing, a break-in character for Zurdo Ramirez, and perhaps he needs to, because he's not going to win those fights at cruiserweight through strength of arms. You're not going to overpower those guys.
Standing in front of them, shoulders square, letting your hands go, you're gonna get killed.
Thus, he seems to have made some changes to his methodology, and we'll see how they work out, because I reiterate, while Breidis is older and he is inactive, he's also a full-fledged cruiserweight that's never been stopped, never been knocked out, and he's been in wars against bigger punchers than Zurdo Ramirez. If Zurdo can't land an authoritative enough punch, what's going to stop Breidis from walking him down, from busting through the front door and hitting him harder than he's ever been hit?
Things to consider.
But based on Ben Damon's tweet, based on this, if this order actually comes down, we have the clarity that we were looking for, the answer. Why was the IBF putting so much pressure on Jai Opetaia to fight a guy that didn't want to fight yet anyway? Now we know. It's because they wanted to take the belt from Jai to give it to Zurdo. Make it easier for Zurdo to win it. And why would they want to do that? Well, it's likely because somebody's paying them to.
Why the fuck else?
This would require Golden Boy Promotions to work with Kale and Nisei Sorlin over there at Wasserman, what is an odd pairing. You don't often see Golden Boy Promotions doing fights with those guys. Not that those guys wouldn't work with them. I'm sure that they would. It's just an odd pairing that you don't often see.
But we might see it very soon.